Despite the constant attacks on Venezuela by the Colombian government, President Nicolas Maduro has offered to send medical devices to Colombia to assist its fight against the novel coronavirus. The United States has become the first country in the world to report more than 1,000 COVID-19 fatalities in a single day. China has declared Saturday a National Day of Mourning for all those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro praised the response of the population in complying with 3 weeks of lockdown. Maduro highlighted that this measure was followed with discipline and without repression of a state of exception as seen in some other nations. He also announced that 7 new coronavirus cases have been reported in the country for a total of 153. So far, 52 people have recovered from the virus in Venezuela. The president also stressed that the quarantine measures will continue to be strengthened to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Despite the constant attacks on Venezuela by the Colombian government of Ivan Duque, President Maduro reiterated his offer to send 2 devices for the diagnosis of the novel coronavirus to the country, which could be sent this Saturday if accepted.
And I offered, on behalf of the people of Venezuela, 2 devices for Colombia. And here they are, 2 brand new devices for the people of Colombia, despite everything that President Ivan Duque does against Venezuela. Here they are, Ivan Duque, the Bolivarian and Solidary government will send these 2 devices to your sister nation of Colombia.
President of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, addressed the Ecuadorian population on Friday to assure them that his government is making all efforts to control the coronavirus epidemic. Despite the widespread criticism of his handling of the health crisis, Moreno laid the blame for the spread of the virus on people who are not complying with the lockdown measures.
Compatriots, the problem is the same, although in different proportions. The social irresponsibility is the same. The apathy is the same. We must understand the seriousness of this situation. It is completely unacceptable. Stop. Don't continue. You are killing Ecuadorians.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Ecuadorian citizens have complained about the mismanagement of the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. Images of bodies in the streets have been shared on social media as families struggle to pay for the burials of their relatives killed by the COVID-19 disease. Due to a lack of morgue space, some are forced to keep the bodies of their relatives at home for days while they wait to be able to cremate them or find a burial site. There are very few people on the streets of El Salvador after the authorities announced they would reinforce the protocols of the nationwide lockdown to prevent an increase in coronavirus cases. The strengthening of preventive measures was established after President Nayib Bukele announced 5 new coronavirus cases, bringing the total to 46. However, the authorities highlighted that there are 8 suspected cases which will be submitted to medical examinations. The president stressed that the new cases were of people who entered the country from abroad.
El presidente ordenó medidas económicas.
The president ordered economic measures that could improve the direct impact on many families in the country due to the coronavirus situation.
Están teniendo a raíz de la situación del coronavirus.
Le pido al señor presidente que por favor...
I ask the president to please lend us a hand. I live in Margaritas and we don't even have water faced with this disease. We are going to be in a worse situation. Please, we need financial help. I go out to sell things. I am diabetic and over 60. I have to go out to make money to support my family. We are forced to go out. Please, President, lend us a hand.
Presidente.
Meanwhile, the Latin American region continues to record an increase in confirmed COVID-19 cases. As of Friday, Chile has over 3,700 cases and has reported 22 deaths due to the novel coronavirus. In the meantime, Mexico has reported 1,500 cases and 50 deaths. Panama's health ministry said on Thursday it had registered 1,475 coronavirus cases and 5 more deaths, bringing the total number to 37. Panama, along with Peru, started to impose stricter limits on how often people can leave their homes on Thursday in a bid to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Peru now has over 1,400 COVID-19 cases and has confirmed 55 fatalities. The Puerto Rico Health Department has reported 62 new positive cases of COVID-19, taking the overall tally to over 370. The island has reported 15 deaths due to the novel coronavirus. The latest fatality was a 41-year-old man, the youngest person to be killed in the country. Meanwhile, the Bahamas reported its first COVID-19 death this week, while the Prime Minister revealed 6 new confirmed cases, bringing the total to 21. Over the last week, the Caribbean region has reported an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. So far, Martinique and Trinidad and Tobago are among the worst affected nations in the area, with 138 and 97 confirmed cases respectively. Cuba is broadcasting a new series of special educational programs on television due to the school closures in the midst of the coronavirus epidemic. Our correspondent in Havana, Nayara Tardo, has the story.
Fernanda and Marina also stay at home, but not as vacations, because they still attend to classes. Now this house, like many in Cuba these days, becomes a personalized classroom after the closure of schools to prevent the contagion of COVID-19 in the island nation.
I think it's an excellent initiative since some children of the second grade specifically are about to have their exams, and these teleclasses help to study and go over the content that they should know. But also, they put audiovisual aids that encourage them to be in front of a TV without a teacher, because it's only a visual teacher, which is not the same. But I think they are taking the whole experience quite well.
On the other side of the screen, a team of professionals complying with all the required safety standards work hard and fast so that the learning content reaches Cuban homes. Professor Rose is 69 years old. She's been teaching for half a century. Now she replaces the classrooms with a television set. However, the nerves and the dynamics of teaching on live television for the first time does not prevent her from doing her job.
Our responsibility is bigger because when we talk, we want to do our best for our young students. We feel like the time is not going to be enough, which is the biggest challenge of this way of teaching on live television.
As quick as the circumstances demanded, the Cuban television system and the Cuban Ministry of Education designed a strategy to reach every student in every corner of the country.
2 channels of television, the Educational Channel and Telerebelde Channel, are dedicated to this purpose. Due to the reach they have, we are broadcasting educational programs dedicated to primary, secondary, and high school students, as well as for those studying a technical degree. We have around 45 hours of broadcasting for young students at home, for children and parents, to give them company and support during while the epidemic period lasts.
On the other side, the class ends. Marina also takes this time to prepare herself to practice and study for the test to enter the music school, which she will do when everything calms. Meanwhile, she says goodbye with this melody, full of good wishes in defense of life and health.
Nayara Tardo, Telesur, La Habana.
More stories coming up after this short break, so stay put. Welcome back to From the South. The United States has become the first country in the world to report more than 1,000 COVID-19 fatalities in a single day. According to data from Johns Hopkins University, the US has confirmed 245,442 cases so far. Meanwhile, the total number of COVID-19 deaths rose to 6,098, while the number of recovered patients is now 10,411. New York State has the largest number of cases, and its healthcare system is on the brink of collapse. According to Governor Andrew Cuomo, the virus is more powerful and more dangerous than expected. A total of 205 countries and regions have now reported COVID-19 cases. And New York City hospitals are now storing the bodies of coronavirus victims in street trailers as the death toll in the city has reached close to 3,000. Bodies are being loaded onto refrigerated morgue trucks outside overwhelmed hospitals in full view of passing motorists. Americans have purchased at least 1.9 million guns since the coronavirus crisis broke out in March, the second highest peak in history after January 2013, which saw a sales record of 2 million. US media have reported long lines at gun shops across the country in recent weeks, with sales doubling compared to the previous month in most states and even tripling in states like Michigan, which is suffering from a major COVID-19 outbreak. The New York Times compared the purchase of guns by Americans to the panic buying of toilet paper or canned foods, claiming Americans are preparing for an uncertain future, with some people fearful that the pandemic could lead to civil unrest. The numbers are an estimate calculated on the basis of the background checks that the FBI undertakes on buyers, although there are states and fairs that do not require this procedure, so the real numbers are likely to be higher. The Mexico City metro system continues to operate according to its regular schedules, but with new hygiene measures established to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. Our correspondent Isa Garcia has the details.
The most popular transportation system in Mexico is the underground or metro. It has 12 lines and is used by millions of people every day, even during the current pandemic.
I don't have a car and I have to use public transportation. That is why I use the metro. I have no other choice. Even though the authorities demand us to stay home, there are people who live from informal employment and we have to go out. There is no other way.
Long before the status of sanitary emergency was declared, preventive measures increased in the 46 stations and terminals of the capital underground train system. The surfaces are disinfected, antibacterial gel is placed in the hands of passengers. Locking wedges, car dispatchers and staircase handrails are also disinfected.
It is a good measure since it's all about prevention. About the cleaning, I would like it to be permanent and that we will be used to cleaning above all.
The sanitary strategy also includes the hygiene of drivers' hands, the cleaning of tubes and handrails, as well as the sanitation in all the terminals and in the 3,213 wagons of the system. Several weeks ago, the 316 trains that make up the metro in Mexico City are disinfected.
Previously, it was made once every 15 days in all the trains that were in service, and today is daily made. Each one of the people who are working in the system and give our very best so they can trust us.
Despite of the needs to increase hygiene, the metro's older and cleaning workers were sent to their houses to avoid coronavirus contagion. The government has insisted on the need for everyone who can to remain at home and has offered support to informal employees so that they comply with these preventive measures, now unavoidable worldwide, as the only way to slow down the spread of the virus and stop this pandemic.
Isa Garcia, Telesur, Ciudad de México.
Commercial activity in Europe has been hit by the efforts to contain the coronavirus pandemic, which has forced governments to shut down wide sectors of the economy. With businesses closed throughout the region, purchasing managers' indices suggest a deep recession, falling to a historic low in March. It is expected that it could be months before things begin to return to normal. Since lockdown measures began to be adopted on March 14th, the PMI in the services sector in Spain fell to a historic low of 23. Meanwhile, in Italy, the PMI dropped to 17.4, and in France, it fell to 27.4. In Germany, Europe's largest economy, mass layoffs were reported at the fastest rate in almost 23 years. The British Army has been drafted in to support the National Health Service this week as medical staff continue to battle the novel coronavirus. 20,000 military staff are on standby as part of the COVID-19 support force, delivering personal protection equipment and ventilators to hospitals. But many medical staff have claimed the response comes too late and that they are currently working without adequate protection, putting them at risk of contracting the virus and passing it on to their patients. As hospitals brace for an expected rise in critically ill patients when the pandemic reaches its peak across the United Kingdom, they stress they are risking their lives because they haven't been equipped with adequate protective gear. The UK coronavirus death toll has risen to 3,605, representing almost 300 more fatalities than in China. Meanwhile, over 38,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 so far. The President of Portugal has extended the state of emergency in the nation for 2 more weeks. Portugal has reported over 9,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 200 deaths.
It has been and will continue to be a radical change in our lives. It has been and will continue to be for a few more weeks. But what matters is to know that this change is worth tens of thousands of lives saved. For those who suffered or suffer from the pandemic, for those who died alone and without a proper farewell, for their families or final invocation of solidarity. We will not forget them, and it is for them and for the millions and millions that we commit ourselves in winning the second stage, allowing for us to win the greatest challenge of all our lives.
Moscow announced on Friday that the US, UK and the EU, among other countries, rejected the Russian motion to the UN calling for unilateral sanctions to be lifted in the midst of the fight against COVID-19. Moscow's permanent mission to the UN issued a statement on Thursday questioning why Ukraine, Georgia, the UK, US and EU had shot down its proposal, arguing that these nations refused to cast aside politicised approaches and interests and that their decision could negatively affect a great number of people, especially in developing nations currently under sanctions. The Russian motion called for the rejection of trade wars and unilateral sanctions adopted without the mandate of the UN Security Council in order to ensure early access to food and medication. The motion was co-sponsored by 28 UN member states. And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. China has declared Saturday a National Day of Mourning for all those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Chinese flags will be flown at half-mast across the country and at embassies overseas, while all public entertainment will be halted for the day, the State Council announced on Friday. At 10 a.m, the public will be asked to observe 3 minutes of silence, during which sirens will blast out across the country and the owners of cars and boats should sound their vehicles' horns. Meanwhile, the government of Hubei has named 14 local people who died from COVID-19 as martyrs, including doctors and health workers who died fighting the novel coronavirus. Officials in China announced on Friday the country will further increase financial support for small and medium enterprises to reduce the impact of the coronavirus. China's Ministry of Finance said it will allow the country's local governments to issue more bonds to stimulate the economy, which is set to shrink due to the pandemic.
The funds will continue to be invested in major infrastructure projects, including traffic infrastructure, energy projects, agricultural, forestry and water conservation projects, ecologic and environmental projects, civil welfare, cold chain logistic facilities, as well as municipal and industrial park infrastructures.
Health workers have been on the front line of the battle that China has waged in the past few months against the novel coronavirus. But the latest technology has also served in the fight against the pandemic. Let's take a closer look. Senegal marked 60 years of its independence on Saturday. However, the celebrations to mark the anniversary have been postponed due to the novel coronavirus. The Independence Day ceremony this year will feature only a military parade. The coronavirus is spreading rapidly on the African continent, and there is great concern that it will be difficult to maintain social distancing, especially in poorer communities where large families live together in small spaces or in busy marketplaces. Senegal also placed a ban on Friday prayers for Muslims and Sunday church services for Christians, while schools and universities have been closed. There are now over 7,000 confirmed novel coronavirus cases across the African continent. According to the latest data from the Africa Centers for Disease Control, there has been a rise in cases and only 4 countries are still holding out. So far, 290 deaths have been reported and over 600 patients have recovered. South African riot police raided a church in central Cape Town on Thursday to remove hundreds of migrants that had been sheltering there for months. The foreign migrants had previously refused to leave the church and demanded the South African government help relocate them to other countries after suffering xenophobic attacks last year. According to local reports, riot police broke down the church's doors to remove the migrants, who were led onto buses and taken to a temporary camp outside the city. Kenya is rushing to ward off an outbreak of COVID-19 amongst the close to 2 million people displaced from their homes by the jihadist armed group Boko Haram. Around the city of Maiduguri, hundreds of thousands have been placed into government-controlled camps or makeshift shelters at unofficial sites. The East African nation has so far reported 110 cases of the novel coronavirus, and there have been at least 3 deaths. Turnout in the parliamentary elections held in Mali last Sunday was just 36%, as many people decided to stay away from polling stations due to threats of violence and the coronavirus epidemic. Voters in the war-torn West African country cast their ballots for new members of parliament on Sunday in an election that has been long delayed, mainly due to security concerns. Polling day was marked by several violent incidents in Mali's volatile north and centre, including the kidnapping of officials. Mali has struggled to contain jihadist violence that broke out in the country's north in 2012 before engulfing the centre of the country. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have since been killed. Last week's election followed the kidnapping of leading opposition figure Soumaïla Cissé. But analysts said the election to the 147-seat parliament was critical to implementing reforms that could help the former French colony out of the cycle of violence. April 2nd marked 2 years since the death of South African anti-apartheid icon Winnie Madikizela Mandela. To mark the occasion, the African National Congress Women's League held the role she played in mobilising women to rise up against the oppressive and racist apartheid regime, while the Economic Freedom Fighters Party described her as a liberator who contributed immensely to the struggle against apartheid. As we reach the end of this news brief, we offer you some clips of Winnie, affectionately known in South Africa as the Mother of the Nation. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
It is an individual choice you make in your life to make a difference. It is an individual choice to understand that my neighbor is not as privileged as I am. Extend your heart to those around you, and that is the democracy you should protect.